Hello, Saltines. Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Salty Witches podcast. I'm sure you have noticed by now that Austin is absent once again. Um, he has this weird, like almost conspiracy theory kind of idea that I'm deliberately trying to keep him off of the podcast, but I assure you that is not true. Um, he's just been caught up today with some projects around the shop. Those of you who've been into the store or who have maybe ordered some of our incense will know that Austin makes the most amazing incense, and he is in major production right now for incense for some upcoming events and the spooky season. So I apologize for his absence, but I'm still here, and I hope that I will have some interesting things to discuss with you today. So the first thing that I want to do is say that we've got a lot of listener questions today, and I'm loving the listener questions that are coming through because when so many of you contact us with your questions, it is clear through reading what you're sending that you are all really like you're engaged, like you are doing it, you are learning, you are growing, you are healing, you're really doing the work, and I am so encouraged by that because that's why we do this to try to be just another resource, just another thing and really a sea of things that you potentially can be tuning into, to get information or validation for your efforts and what you're doing for yourselves. So you're amazing. And again, I just want to thank you so much for sending us your questions and your feedback, because it not only gives us an opportunity to think and to do some of our own work, right? And also to present some really cool information for those of you who tune in. But it's very encouraging. It gives me warm fuzzies every time we get an email or some sort of communication from one of you where you're kind of detailing what you're going through, the experience you've had, in the context of delivering a question to us, right? And I love that. So thank you so much. Thank you. I am always so excited when I see people who are really doing the good work. So from there, I want to talk briefly about the Red Goddess, also referred to as the Scarlet Woman. And I mentioned her. The reason I'm talking about her is I mentioned her on last week's mini episode in response to a question that we received from one of our viewers, our listeners, our saltines, from one of you, concerning working with the divine feminine archetype of goddess Babylon. And I, in trying to answer some of the details of what that might look like, I mentioned or dropped the reference just very casually around the Red Goddess, and it occurred to me that there was maybe a bit more maybe to discuss around that. So I want to first say that the Red Goddess or the Scarlet Goddess is not a single deity. This is not a single goddess. The Red Goddess or the Scarlet Woman, I'll refer to her primarily as the Red Goddess because we are talking about a goddess here, okay? The Red Goddess is a term used to describe any of a number of goddesses that we see in all eras, historically, in almost every culture of the world, and what she really is she is the primordial goddess form that influences processes of creation and destruction. She is, in essence, she's everything. But there is, I think, for many people, at least, when they start to connect with a goddess that is kind of fitting this archetype, um, she can be a little scary initially for many people. I think because of that very old, that very primal energy, and because in addition to being such a strong force for creation and manifestation, she is also there as a destroyer. So many of you, I'm sure, as you're thinking about this, if you are at all familiar with different goddesses from around the world and different cultures, you will, maybe be aware of a goddess that would fall into kind of this description, right? We have, of course, my favorite, Hecate, right? But we see many others, Persephone. And we need to be respectful of these things, right? Once again, I'm going to kind of move into the realm of like the concept of making sure that we're being careful about how we maybe are taking pieces, or we want to really be careful not to be appropriating things, taking things that we shouldn't, right? But just for additional qualifiers, we have goddesses like Kali, right? We have in the Gaelic or Celtic pantheon, we have goddesses like the Morrigan or Caradwen, right? We have, I mean, there are so many. Like in the Norse pantheon, we have goddesses like Hela. Like there are so many around the world. There are. Oh my God, like I'm drawing a blank right now, but like even like ancient Aztec and Mayan deities, Asian deities, beyond Kali, right? Um, there are so many, and these are again all goddesses that are believed by the people, or believed to be, I should say, by the people who connect with and worship them and devote to them in some capacity, to be these are amongst the oldest goddesses. Not that that really, means much, right? But there is something to be said about an intelligence or a deity that has been in existence or was in existence even prior to the creation of humanity, right? Like it's kind of cool to think that, oh, there are deities, there are beings and spirits out there that actually got to see maybe not the birth of the universe, but the inevitable evolution of universe, of our solar system, our planets, our sun, us, right? There's something kind of cool about that. And I think because of that, it also would maybe I would think logically it would maybe help us to see that those are deities or spirits that might have a deeper understanding or an appreciation for the complexities of humanity, right? And I think red goddesses do, in addition to being such powerful forces for creation and also the balancing scales of creation, with destruction, right? These are deities, I think, that really do, though they are obviously inhuman, right? These are deities, I believe, these are goddesses that I think really do have a much deeper appreciation for humanity. They can be tempestuous in their personalities. They're very forceful, and they have a lot of power behind them, obviously, right? But that doesn't mean that they are completely incapable of understanding, again, us, right? And so I think that the red goddess is um, one, or the many goddesses that would kind of fit into that title. I think that these have continued to be popular goddesses because they ultimately are the deities that we connect with most, that are going to really encourage us as we grow as people, as beings, as individuals, right? These are goddesses that are just as much about our evolution as human beings and the way that we interact with our physical day-to-day life and the physical world around us. They are as much about that as they are concepts of spiritual ascension, right? And gnosis and that kind of evolution, right? So they're more complete in a sense, and I think through working with them, we ultimately have the opportunity to also become more complete. Which is not to say that we are incomplete as beings. We're not, right? But we have a chance, I think, to do more meaningful, more powerful work in all senses. So red goddesses are just, they're very cool. Their popularity, I think, and they've always been popular. If you look at all of the deities, all of the goddesses, the strong divine feminine influences in all kinds of different spiritualities, you're going to find absolutely that they've always been popular. Okay, even in organized religion, the goddess Mary, and if there are any people, any of you watching this who are maybe lapsed Catholics, or maybe you're still actively going to church, who knows, right? But you have some of that within you, or some other version of Christianity, Abrahamic faith that would involve Mary, the Jesus's mother, Mary, right? Um, Mary is also would be considered a red goddess. She is a goddess that was directly associated with creation, right? Um, she also is a goddess that is associated with destruction, because while she was not directly connected to the death of Christ in the story, in the mythos around Jesus Christ and his ministries and life, right? Mary was still there at the time of his death. She was still there to see his process of crucifixion, and beyond that, she was there when Jesus was reincarnated, when Jesus ascended and returned to life, right? So we see again creation, destruction, right? So these are very popular goddesses. They always have been, I think, because well, a lot of the things I've already listed, right? They get us. They are us, just as we are them. Even men, like if you are a cis male, if you are someone who just you identify more with that masculine or that traditional male kind of an energy, these goddesses are just as much for you. You are just as much of them, and they are just as much within you, right? This is not a divide around gender or sex. This is just very much the archetype or the representation of that divine feminine power, which also incorporates the masculine. It would have to, right? It would have to. Um, so they're very popular. They've been popular. They continue to be popular in our modern world because these are also red goddesses are also the deities, the goddesses that are most likely to um, interact, to witness, to see, to understand, and to also work with us in some capacity to help to heal and to balance the evils in our world. And by evils, what I'm talking about is the things that we as humans have done to our world, our physical planet, also our own ourselves, human society, and just humanity, right? The evils, the difficulties, the things that are negatively impacting the majority of humans at this point, really, to be honest, have very little to do with divine origin or even spiritual influence. These are, for the most part, things that we do because we are still growing. We are still learning and evolving as a form of life, just humanity in general, right? We haven't gotten to that point of spiritual ascension or enlightenment, and I don't know that we ever will, right? But we can keep trying, right? And red goddesses are there to help us to do that. They help us to see the value in creation and healing, and how a lot of that is most accomplished by facing our shadow and the uglier pieces of ourselves and of our being, right? Because it is by acknowledging those things that we then bring those things out, that we make the ugly and the broken into beautiful and whole things, right? And so they're very good, they're very important and very powerful, I think, for those reasons. They are also there again as the influence of destruction is something that also is part of their wheelhouse. They are also there to help us to see that sometimes we get to a moment, we have a situation, we need a person, and we have to recognize that for whatever reason, in whatever way, that situation, that person, whatever, is maybe too broken to salvage, right? And in that situation, rather than trying to heal and fix and remake, it maybe is better just to bring an end to that, right? To assert that boundary, to close that door, to say goodbye, right? Or to let that situation come to an end, right? In whatever sense. Because then that gives us the room in our lives, and I would say hopefully the energy to then maybe try to start over, to create something new, right? Because that's how creation and destruction work, right? There is no creation without destruction, just as there is no destruction without creation. Creation and destruction are the only true duality in our universe. People talk about dualities, things like masculine and feminine, light and dark, these kinds of things. But all those really are constructs. Those are just constructs or ideas, concepts that we have, and they have value. Absolutely. There's nothing wrong with any of that. But the only true duality that we can really see in our universe, in all that is, in essence, is the cycle of creation and destruction, or the balance of creation and destruction, right? And we need both, right? I know destruction gets a little tricky for a lot of people because a lot of us don't like to see things come to an end, but the reality is that everything comes to an end, including us, right? But we come to an end so that we can begin again, right? So there really is no ending. It's just a transmutation. It's just a change, the nature of who and what we are, right? So you don't need to be fearful of endings, okay, or destruction. Sometimes destruction can actually be our best friend, right? I think any of you who maybe have had to go through the end of a relationship, and in the aftermath of that, you've actually gotten to see just how terrible and destructive that situation was, and now you're free, right? Sometimes destruction can be a really good thing, right? So I wanted to talk about that a little bit more as to ways to cultivate connections to red goddesses. Many of you probably already have those. Maybe you're just not as consciously aware, or maybe it's just the terminology, right? Maybe you've been working really effectively with a goddess like Lilith, right? Or the Morrigan or Hecate or whomever, right? Whichever one of those many goddesses. And they're all beautiful and amazing, powerful, right? Maybe you've been working with them for a long time, but the terminology or the archetype, the title, the energy around what a red goddess is just something maybe that you had never heard of before. If you want to learn a bit more about the archetypal energies of the red goddess, and again, not a specific goddess, but just a title that represents many different types of goddesses. Again, I want to encourage you to check out the book by Peter Gray. Yeah, just do you can do a Google search for Peter Gray, and he does have just a book. I believe it's just called The Red Goddess. But there's a lot of really good information in there. Red goddesses, again, in making more of a conscious effort to work with them and to acknowledge the archetype of red goddess, even in deities or within goddesses that you may already be working with. Do remember that in establishing a connection with those deities and working with her, whoever she may be, that she's going to put you through your paces. Like she's going to show up, and in order for her to continue to show up, she is going to demand, she is going to expect that you continue to heal and learn and grow, because that's what she's all about, right? So I think these are definitely the kinds of deities that we need to be working with most in our world right now. And just beyond the world, just within ourselves, right? It's time. It's time. I think we are aware now that we are capable as human beings. We are aware that we are capable of so much more and that we could be doing so much better for ourselves in our world. And red goddesses are there to kind of encourage that thinking, right? So red goddess. So from there, I want to kind of move into our listener questions, okay? Because we have a few this week, okay? And again, these are all really cool situations. Well, I shouldn't say the situations are cool because a few of these are not good situations or cool situations. But again, just that people are looking at these things and that they are contacting us, to follow up or maybe to get validation of maybe something they've already done. Amazing. So, all right, so let's dive in. All right. This person who contacts us would like to remain anonymous, on the off chance that some other people that are involved in the situation may potentially also listen to the podcast. Okay, so all right. Let's see. Let me find the starting point here. Okay. Oh, they do say that there's a little bit of a trigger warning here that this story does involve some emotional abuse and coercion. Okay. And so just being aware, right? Pretty heavy situation. They also want to qualify that they are actively working through a lot of what's gone on with a therapist, and they do have a good support system. Okay. As you are listening to this episode, thank you so much for qualifying that, because when we get a story like this, when we have a question come through that has these kinds of details, that is immediately one of the things that we do to kind of worry about is have you talked with anybody in a professional capacity, right, around this, like a mental health professional, right? Are you taking care of those pieces as well, right? We want to make sure we're really careful about spiritual bypass, right? Okay, story. All right. So my roommate, who we will call C, okay, started casually dating towards the beginning of this year. Roommate meets a 21-year-old trans person on a dating app. Okay, we're going to identify this trans person as T, right? So C is now dating T. Okay. And from the look of it, T did not give C, this person's roommate, did not give them informed consent. Okay. And they don't really elaborate on this too much. Consent is, and I think just in any context, consent is always such an important thing. We've talked about issues of consent in spiritual practice. We talked about issues of consent as it would relate to just sex, sexuality, right, on the podcast before. But again, just to reiterate, this is such an important thing, right? And so they do mention here that there was apparently some connection now between C and T, and there was a lack of informed consent from T. Okay, which our listener, our Saltine that wrote in, indicate or says that they consider this to be a form of assault. And I would probably agree, actually. So when these two first started talking, the conversation was with T. But T was taking birth control pills, and they did not need to utilize any other form of protection while they were having sex. It was only after T found out that he is pregnant that he reveals the information to C, right? That he forgets to take basically the birth control pills that he needs to. And again, just to be clear, I'm using he, him pronouns, right? But again, remember, we're dealing with this as a trans man. Okay. So, and those of you who aren't aware, trans men, even after they have transitioned, right, and they are now living in, as they are men, right? We want to acknowledge and honor them as men. Physiologically, there can still be very female anatomy going on, right? And so a lot of people maybe are not aware, but trans men can still get pregnant. So T neglected to mention that they were not taking their birth control, and as a result, T and C were not using any other sort of protection. Okay, T gets pregnant. Okay, and makes up a whole bunch of excuses and justifications for why they were not taking their birth control consistently. There's a whole lot of effort made kind of after this to get T in to meet, a doctor. There are conversations had around maybe getting an abortion, right? Um, and T is through this whole process, it looks like doing a lot of gaslighting and a lot of just a lot of emotional manipulation with C. There are T is threatening to unalive themselves. They're saying that they're suicidal about the situation. They need help. And really all of that is in essence just kind of working to kind of get to trap C in a situation around resolving this for T. Right. Um, so apparently while all of this is going down, there has now been a physical separation, and T has now moved away from C, at least temporarily, and is now living with family who are unfortunately very homophobic or transphobic, and not at all supportive of the situation. T is still pregnant. C is, of course, not sure what to do about all of this, right? Because C is now not only dealing with what seems to be a very troublesome potential relationship partner, but now also dealing with baby that really was not part of the plan, right? They go on to qualify that T also has a history of some other mental health issues, emotional health issues, and that there have been some other problems up to and including even having to go into a psych ward at some point. So, getting to the kind of the actual question here, I think. Okay, let's see. Okay, so they say it's clear to them that he does not value C's well-being at all and has been manipulating him because she basically thinks they can get away with it. Um, they feel like they are watching the start of a very volatile and emotionally abusive relationship, and there's nothing they can do but watch their friends suffer. C continues to tell the listener that wrote us that everything is okay, even when they are very clearly in the position of being abused by their relationship partner. Okay. All right. Question. What would we do? What would I do in a situation like this? Okay. So there's a lot going on here, obviously. There's a lot of complication. Okay. But the first thing that I'm going to say is that T, the problematic relationship partner in this situation, who is now pregnant, this person is not going to change. A lot of people, I think, a lot of witches, a lot of magical practitioners find themselves in moments where they have a friend like this, right? They have a friend, someone that they love, who is involved in a romantic situation that just proves to be very unhealthy for whatever reason, right? And as magical practitioners, we want to maybe help pull the person that we love out of that situation, right? And a lot of people in doing this, what they try to do is they try to work energy around the offending person, right? The relationship partner, right? That is the problem, right? They direct energy or they do things to try to remove that person, right? And there's nothing wrong with that necessarily. But people who have the personality traits, people who have the psychological issues of someone like T, they are not going to be driven away. These are psychological issues and personality traits that, if anything, actually lock them in or trap them into relationships dynamics with people like C, because C will always be there to step up as caretaker, fixer, healer, whatever, right? So rather than focusing on a baneful kind of way of driving someone like C, their troublesome partner, away, T, getting rid of the troublesome partner, what is actually better to do in a situation like this is to focus a working around creating a different opportunity for the offending partner. And I know that sounds really tricky because a lot of people are like, I don't like this person. The last thing I want to do is do them a favor or create a path in their life towards something better for them. But by nature, we all tend to move toward the things that we can recognize are going to be better, sweeter, easier, happier situations for us, right? So, and if you're trying to remove someone from your life, if you're trying to get rid of someone, rather than working a curse or a hex or a bind, do some sort of something that would maybe be almost like a road opener or some sort of glamour working, even perhaps, where you are creating an opportunity. In this particular instance, what I would probably do is I would probably actually do a working to create um, a situation where maybe another person steps into this situation, this, the details of this, and in whatever way this other person seems to be a better or a preferable partner for T to choose over C. And that's tricky, right? Because there's nothing about that situation. There's no way to go about doing this or any way to affect a situation like this that is not going to cause C, your friend, some hurt. But that's one of those situations I think where we have to kind of look at, it's almost like kind of like ripping a band-aid off, right? Like you can allow it to sit there, you know until I mean, and it becomes irritating and inconvenient, right? And it's more painful over time to kind of see that, or you can just, just real quick, just rip it off, right? Either way, you're going to get a little bit of an ouch, right? But I think in a situation like this, it would be better for you to do something to remove T from the equation, right? In that way, right? But do it in a quick way where C might, yeah, of course, experience a little bit of hurt and heartache, but they'll be able to move beyond that more quickly rather than, allowing them to deal with what, from the sound of it, has already been the better part of a year and who knows how many more years, right? Of difficulty, pain at the hands of an abusive relationship partner, right? So again, remember, T is not going to change. The sad thing around situations like this is more often than not the person that is the problem. They're not going to change. They've not been given any incentive to change their behavior or to become anybody other than who they are because they've had people like C there to step up and fix everything for them and heal them and take care of the issues and make excuses for their behavior, right? Okay, so you mentioned that your first instinct was to curse T, and again, I'm going to tell you not to do that. Okay, and I understand that you're angry, but we have to, in moments like this, we have to be able to put that raw emotion aside. Raw emotion is an amazing thing, and there's nothing wrong with being angry or feeling rage around this. Anybody in the situation, I think, who loved their friend, absolutely. Like if I were in your shoes and C was my friend, oh my God, I would be beside myself. I would be livid with this person, with T, right? But we have to, in the moment that we want to work magic around a situation like this, we have to be able to put our personal feelings aside to be able to effectively structure our working and to think clearly around how to remove this influence, right? So from there, bring your anger back in. Once you've got that figured out and you know what you're going to do, call that anger back up in the process of doing your spell work because emotion is a powerful source of energy, right? Like there's so much oomph to what we feel when we're actually doing the work and we can send that emotion into that situation, right? It's a lovely battery. Okay. But that would be what I would suggest. I would suggest that you sit down and you think of, based on just the knowledge you have of T, think of what could happen, what could come up in T's life that would put them in a situation or create an opportunity for them to choose something other than C, right? And then to move away from that, right? To pursue that, to leave C alone. Okay. That would be how I would consider you do this. Okay. You do have a couple of other things to consider here, right? One, there is now a child or a baby involved in this situation, right? Um, I'm not sure what you do with that because even if you are successfully able to drive T away, there is always the likelihood that T will pop back up later on and expect child support. Who knows, right? That'll of course then be a situation that needs to be handled by the laws of humanity, right, and the court system. um, One of the other things that I really need you to consider around this, and this is something we always need to consider when we're looking at something like this, anytime we get our magic caught up in someone else's relationships, we need to consider both partners, right? It would also be good for you to look very carefully at your friend at sea and to really be honest with yourself and even potentially with them about what is going on in them that they feel they need to be there to, in essence, rescue or save T, right? And it could just be by nature. Maybe they're just a very nurturing, caretaking kind of personality, right? And that's okay. And that's a wonderful thing. Nothing wrong with that. But they, from the sound of it, they need to learn to assert some healthier boundaries because there's a whole lot of other stuff that's wrong with this situation. Okay, but that would be how I would recommend you handle that. If if that doesn't work, then beyond that, I'm just going to suggest that as difficult as it is, you may need to distance yourself from this situation because ultimately what's going to end up happening is you're going to have to watch your friend continue to choose this person, this situation that is going to continue to cause them pain. And that's terrible for you as someone who loves them, right? But maintaining or creating some other sort of emotional distance for yourself is going to probably be necessary here. So, yeah. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an answer, right? That would be how I would handle it. All right, moving on. Next situation. Okay, so this is, let's see. Make sure I'm reading the right one. Okay, nope, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. All right, so next question. Person contacts us. They say they are struggling with a recent medical diagnosis that immediately made them question and reevaluate everything in their life. Before anyone starts to wonder, right? They are consulting and working with medical doctors, okay, and they have a plan of action that includes proper medication and lifestyle change. Okay, this person is approaching this situation holistically, which is what we always need to do. Right? We need to go see our doctors. We need to go see our therapists. We need to go see our lawyers. We need to go see whomever that other person may be who helps us handle the mundane, the human stuff, right? Beyond that, we go and we see our witch. We go and we see our whatever title they may be, our folk magician, right? Maybe we are the witch, right? And beyond handling things in a very mundane way, then we move into handle things with the spiritual, right? Holistic approach, always going to be best. Okay, so they wanted to write in and get our opinions. But they for a while now, but they had to hold off on their diagnosis. They finally got a diagnosis, and it looks like they were diagnosed with narcolepsy with cataplexy. Okay, and they say that this diagnosis, the narcolepsy and cataplexy, has some symptoms that are the physiological symptoms of these issues, these health issues. Okay, they have symptoms that are extremely similar or could be mistaken as a cult phenomenon. One of the most notable symptoms that is also key to this listener's issue is hallucinations, particularly around sleep time. Okay, going to sleep or waking up, right? This is also usually paired with a sense of sleep paralysis and what many describe as seeing a dark figure, right? Um, let's see. After the initial shock of questioning their sanity and because of some of the experiences they were having, it took them some time to realize that they can indeed differentiate between their narcoleptic hallucinations, and what they can only describe as some form of astral travel or projection. Okay. In the one case, they're having issues with being paralyzed. They are unable to speak. Okay, and they hear typical noises and things that they know that they really are just there's no physiological explanation for that. So what they're seeing is that in a situation or in the circumstance where they're actually having hallucinations as a result of the medical issue, right? That they are now at a point where they can distinguish those from the phenomena or the experiences they're having as a result of astral projected work. Okay, and that's amazing because that can be really confusing for a lot of people. But there is a distinction. And those of you who are listening, well, we've talked about this on the podcast before. I think it's always a good thing to remind you of it. If you are someone who experiences sleep paralysis, if you are someone who has, particularly as you are coming out of a sleep state, you are aware or actually have visual or sensory images around like dark shadow figures around you in your room, what is really going on in that situation, or at least I want you to consider the possibility of this, is that you are actually someone who you are actively astral traveling. maybe not in that moment, but you have just recently come out of a state of astral projection. And what happens when we astral project is some aspect of our consciousness or our awareness actually moves beyond the limitation of our physical, like chemical, physical brain, right? And kind of moves more into the realm of course, the etheric or the spiritual. And so what happens when we come back out of astral work and we're kind of, once again, kind of bringing ourselves like back together, right? Into, physical human form, right? Is for just a moment or two, our psychic senses, our perceptions that have been expanded in the process of doing the astral travel work that we're doing, those also kind of need to adjust, right? They have to kind of dial back down to our normal day-to-day human, perceptions, right? But in that moment while that's happening, you are still, in essence, kind of wide open. And what that might mean is your visual sense, your actual physical sight, you could be seeing a merging of your physical sight with your psychic senses, which is allowing you to then see shadow figures or other spiritual energies around you, right? Beyond that, there's a moment there for many people, whereas their awareness moves from the astral back into the physical world and the physical body, where their physical body may be slow to respond. And that can be something that can be, again, a state of sleep paralysis. Sleep paralysis does also happen due to some physiological medical things. There's a lot that goes on with our brain chemistry and the wavelengths that our mind moves through or moves into as we're accessing different levels of sleep. So sleep paralysis isn't always a spiritual, or does not always originate from spiritual activity. Okay, there are perfectly physiological reasons for that sometimes. Okay, all right. So sorry, a little bit of a tangent there. Let's see. The one thing I do want to mention before I continue with their question is they actually have mentioned this a couple of times here, and I think this is again important. Okay, they talk about how trying to describe the feeling, the work, and getting to a point of clarity around what's really going on between the medical issue and their spiritual work. They talk about how trying to describe that, or kind of just some of the feelings moving through them as they've been, kind of maybe judging themselves around this or kind of picking this apart, that they have felt crazy. They felt as though they have sounded crazy trying to explain this to others. And I just want to say to all of you right now that these kinds of things, these phenomena, these things when they come up, that is actually really common. That we live in a world, we live in a society, and for the most part, we interact with people day to day who may not have direct experience with these things or who don't really see a value in these kinds of things, right? And so when we start to have moments like this, as we start to kind of figure out how these things work for us, how we feel about them, it can be kind of crazy making, or we can feel that way, but I want you to be really careful about that, right? The important thing I think to always remember is that is the phenomena that you're experiencing, are the things that are happening, are these ultimately things that are, I would hope with a little bit of time and an opportunity to figure them out, are they helping you to are they empowering you in some way? Are they giving you the ability to grow in a real way? Right? Because if the answer to that is no, if they're not helping you to grow or heal or empowering you in some way, then you might really have a problem, right? If it's hallucinatory behavior that be connected to some sort of mental or emotional health issue, um, then typically you're not going to really see healing and growth coming from that kind of behavior, right? But the spirits that would connect with you, the spirits that would be involved in these kinds of things happening, these are typically going to be spirits, at least a few of them, that are going to be helping you to facilitate this work because it is helping you to grow or heal in some way, right? That's the distinction. Is it proving to be a good thing or a bad thing, right? Is it enhancing your experience of your life, or is it hindering and complicating your life in bad ways, right? Those are the pieces to be aware of. Yeah. Okay. All right, let's see. They've talked to a few other practitioners that have also been good or reliable sources of information, so that's excellent. They are actively practicing their craft. So let's see. So they say, what would you suggest doing, or what have we done? What have I done personally in moments where I have experienced doubt in my practice or in my spiritual abilities? Um, Beyond that, they ask what I've been able to do to get back into the groove or to reassure myself that I'm not just going crazy. Okay. And I kind of touched upon that just a moment ago in talking about, looking at how how is how are the consequences of this kind of behavior or these experiences really kind of hitting me in my life, right? Are they proving to be positives? Am I able to consciously see that I'm changing or growing in some way? Am I feeling a little bit better? Right. I think that initially having a little bit of a fear response, feeling some anxiety or worry, or even feeling like we're losing control, I think those are really normal things. And in fact, if you do any research into the anthropology, um, the information around many old, particularly shamanistic spiritual traditions, you're going to see that altered states of consciousness and awareness, even like up to and including um, hallucinations, schizophrenic kinds of behavior. I'm not talking schizophrenia specifically as a mental issue, but the kinds of symptoms or the things that we associate with those kinds of issues, those actually are all things that in many shamanistic practices and very other very old spiritual practices, those would have been considered a part of the work. Those were normal as it would relate to the spiritual work. And in saying that, I don't want to try to send any of you away with the idea that you should be trying to create those experiences, because you shouldn't. Those either happen for you or they don't. Everyone's spiritual path is different. Everyone will react to spiritual work differently. Okay, so you don't want to try to make those things happen. But if they're happening, you do want to be, again, very mindful. You want to be really honest with yourself around, like, is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? How is this affecting my life day to day? Am I still in control when I'm not actively doing the spiritual work? Do I still feel like I'm in a good place in my life? Right. Um, Beyond that, you do need to, it is fair for you to look at, maybe like the history of your family. If you are someone, and I know a few people like this, if you are someone who has, couple generations, back in your family, you've got several people who are popping up with issues like schizophrenia, um, other kinds of hallucinatory kinds of behavior, issues that are, happening for them, that are definitely related to some sort of biological or mental health issue. You really, again, you kind of need to be honest with yourself about that, right? Like, maybe this isn't always necessarily spiritual in origin, right? And in that situation, I do want to encourage you to go and meet with a doctor and to maybe have some conversations and some tests and to see maybe what could be going on just purely biologically, right? But getting back to your question, okay? um I think that experiencing doubt in your spiritual practice is a normal thing. I think that we all have moments that we get to in our spiritual practice, usually in moments where we have expectation, right? Because I find that's the problem. When we start to see doubt arise, typically it's because we've gone into a situation and we've approached our practice in a way where we had an expectation of something, right? And it's tricky, that, because there's nothing wrong with having expectations, right? That's what we do, right? But expectations can oftentimes set us up to fail, or in the aftermath of that, to doubt, right? And we've got to be really mindful of expectation, because that tells us a couple of things. One, we already have a vision for what we want to see or what we would hope would maybe happen next for us, right? Good or bad, right? And when we're dealing with the realm of spirits, we can never really be 100% on that, right? Because we're not the only power at play in that kind of work, right? There are other intelligences and other things going on, other energies that also have influence. Okay. Beyond that, the second thing that expectation can do is it I think, without realizing it, sometimes it limits experience for many of us, because very often our expectations of something could be limiting. I think, in the sense that maybe we're not aware, or we don't really give ourselves credit, like we're capable of something even bigger, better, right? Or something even more amazing could happen for us, right? So expectation is troubling, or is a problem in those ways, right? Beyond that, when we expect something, it doesn't happen, we have that moment of disappointment, and disappointment with a little bit of time can very easily become doubt. But those moments of doubt, I think, are necessary for us as we grow in any sense, because they give us opportunities to check in. And I tell people this a lot: when you have a moment of doubt, when you have a moment of, just you're highly skeptical, whatever it is, right? When, find yourself there. I think that if we handle those moments in the right way, that they give us incentive, or they give us the ability to check in with not only ourselves but with our practice and what we've been doing. If we're putting our energy and our effort into something, and we're seeing just disappointment again and again and again, to the point that doubt has really started to crop up around that, that's a pretty good sign that maybe you want to stop investing in that particular part of your practice, right? um I think that most people kind of come to that realization, but I think that a lot of people go a while and really kind of put themselves through the ringer a lot longer than they should before they acknowledge, like, this is not working. I need to make a change. And it's okay to make a change. Making a change does not mean that you have failed. It means, if anything, that you have actually had an experience that has allowed you now to fine tune the process, right? It's a good thing. It's a good thing. Okay, so don't be fearful of those moments where maybe doubt creeps in a bit. They're normal, they're human, and they're checking or checkpoints, I think, or points for us to be able to really to kind of just take inventory. And it's a good thing. Definitely a necessary component of any kind of process of growth, and certainly spiritual growth. Um, as to what I've done to get back into the groove, I think really that's it. I think being kinder to ourselves when we have a moment where we've doubted or we've had maybe a bad experience and we've had to step away from our practice. Um, I think being being mindful of our well-being in those moments or through that phase, being patient with ourselves. We need to be really careful about that. We need to make sure that we are giving ourselves a little bit of time to kind of heal and adjust, but we also want to make sure we keep our fire going, right? Like, usually there's a goal. Most people, whether they're aware of it or not, they have a goal for why they would practice something like witchcraft or magic or any other kind of spirituality. Like, there's a goal, there's a purpose. Um, and again, I think sometimes the goal changes, right? As we change, but it's still there in some form. I think checking in with the goal or the reason that we decided to pursue a spiritual path in whatever way is also going to be really helpful. It's going to help us to kind of, I think, not only to reassure ourselves, but it would hopefully again help keep that fire burning. And I would again hope that with all of that going on, that after maybe taking a little bit of a break, that we would then come up with a plan and make some adjustments and some change, or we would get going on our spiritual work once more, though even then in that moment it might look a bit different. So yeah. So there's my very long and winding answer to your question. All right. Let's see. So they have a second part of this. They state that they have started to take new medications, maybe to facilitate or to help with this situation around the narcolepsy. Um, but they've noticed that one of the things that's happening as a result of the medications that they're taking is that they are feeling numb, particularly in the way that they would connect to psychic ability, um, or spiritual kinds of ability and work. So they're saying they're having a really hard time doing standard things for them. So they mentioned specifically that they love to make sigils. They like to read with the I Ching or tarot, and even grounding and centering exercises have been a bit more difficult for them. They can't even approach any kind of elaborate spell crafting. So in looking at this, they ask for tips that I might have for them on how to navigate this, other than just trying to power through. Um, this is, to me, I think, another example of how it's necessary for us as we are working on ways to balance ourselves holistically, right? Because you need to take your medication, right? You don't want to stop taking your medication, right? Because if you do that, you're going to have a whole bunch of other problems, right? So you need to keep taking the meds. Okay. In that situation, if you're noticing beyond the spiritual work that your medication is maybe negatively impacting other aspects of your day-to-day life, that's a conversation you need to have with your doctor, right? Like, maybe there's a different medication that would be better for you, right? Or maybe it's just the dosage, right? Maybe that needs to be adjusted, right? As to the spiritual piece, this is to me another sign of how I think we need to be open to the way that things evolve and change. If you are finding in your life that a lot of the things that you were doing previously are now no longer working, or that you're having a difficult time connecting to those things, I would say that this would be a moment for you now to either look at ways to change how you approach and do those things, right? And that can be difficult, right? Particularly if you liked the way that you were doing those things before, having to change that process and do those things differently, that's going to suck. But if you can at least try, you might be surprised. You might find, because I've seen this happen in my own life and in the lives of many other people that I've connected and spoken with over the years. Um, Sometimes we make a change and we have to do something in our spiritual practice that is different than the way we used to do it, right? And in the moment that we have to make that change, we hate it, because by nature we just don't really do a change, right? um, but if we give that moment, so we give ourselves that time to do the thing differently, to see how it works. I've seen a number of times that though we hated it going in, that the difference actually proves to be better for us. And surprisingly, sometimes those things like the sigils that you mentioned you craft, maybe you find a new way to do your sigils, and in the process your sigils become even more powerful than they were before, right? And that's kind of an idealistic kind of a thing. That's kind of like, that's the hope, right? Alternatively, you might decide maybe as you move forward that maybe sigils just aren't really going to be that much a component of your practice anymore, and that's okay too. Maybe it's time for you to find something else where you enjoyed reading the I Ching and the tarot before. You still have those, right? But maybe now's a good time for you to invest in learning a new system of divination, right? We grow and we change, and because of an external situation, right? You mentioned medication specifically. You're now seeing that some component of your being is changing. You're having to make adjustments to that as it would relate to the way that you continue to do your spiritual stuff, right? But that can happen for a number of reasons. Sometimes we just change as people, right? Like I've had a number of situations over the years where I used to really connect with something. I used to do something really, really well. And then I wake up one day and all of a sudden my connection just isn't as strong. And in that moment, I kind of go through a little bit of a process of grief, and I take a few days or even a few weeks to kind of say goodbye to that thing. But I ultimately accept that as an opportunity to now open a new door to make something new happen for myself, right? And I think that that's a much more constructive way to approach that work, right? Your practice will be different, but different isn't bad. It's not a bad thing, right? Different is a good thing, I think. Okay, particularly when we have influence over what that looks like. And you do, certainly in this situation. You get to choose. You get to choose how your practice may now evolve, right? So don't be worried about it. All right. Let's see. You mentioned that you'd like to hear us talk a bit more about osteomancy. And we can certainly do that. Let's see. Just reading through your notes here. Yeah, we can talk about osteomancy a bit more on the podcast. I'll have to sit and think about that, because that conversation, while that it could be an interesting conversation, that could be a tricky one, particularly for our listeners, like people who don't join us on YouTube. And if you haven't had a chance to actually watch the podcast on YouTube, you should join us, because Austin and I are, I think, even more, we come across as even more ridiculous when you can actually see us in action, not just hear us. Let's see. And you've got some other suggestions here for future topics. So we will absolutely. Sorry about that. Phone ring. I'm recording this in the shop during business hours, which I probably shouldn't do. But it's nice to be able to do this so that I don't have to be here so late at night. So forgive me, the shop phone rang. I had to take a call. Anyway, so I'm gonna hold on to this information, okay? And yes, we can absolutely see about getting like some of these topic suggestions. I think these are really good. Let's see. Most of this is going to be osteomancy specific, but I love osteomancy, like throwing bones, reading bones. Amazing work. Really cool divination. Okay. All right, let's see. All right, moving on to our next listener response. Okay, so this is not a question. Okay, those of you who've been with us for a while now might remember this question when it came through. It's been a few months ago now. So this person contacts us, and this is basically kind of an update of the situation. So they say, thanks for taking the time to answer my question in such depth on the episode that they contacted us on previously. It's taken me a while, this is their words, it's taken me a while to respond with an update because I've been focused on healing from a very traumatic birth. I'm very sorry. This traumatic birth this trauma was both physical and mental. Okay. And they say, don't feel obligated to put this on the air. I want to talk about this because your experience here, and again, I am so sorry. And I remember your question when you contacted us before. And I remember that our response to you was, it was not a happy answer, or not our communication with you was not happy. And again, and I'm so sorry that you had to go through this experience. But from the sound of it, you made it through and things are better now. And I'm so happy to hear that. Okay. So I want to share this though, because I think that your experience here and how you had to go through this, I think that this is a very powerful story to share, particularly when we look at the way that people think about deity work. Okay. So you say that in response to what you asked us on the prior episode that we were right, and you were very angry with us because you felt a sense of abandonment. I think maybe not only from us, but with the deity that I remember we talked about in response to your question. But you say that you now can reflect on the process of the birth that you went through from a place of healing and you're feeling stronger, and that you've had some very important realizations. Okay, you qualify, you go on to add that your daughter was born with a condition, and I hope I pronounce this correctly, choreo let me try to say it, chorioamnionitis, which is a rare and extremely dangerous infection that happens in the placenta. This is unfortunately a leading cause of stillbirth in many children. Your daughter also had the umbilical cord wrapped around her neck, and she was unable, because of that, she was able to fully descend down the birth canal, which eventually led to her heart rate dropping dangerously. You were offered an emergency C-section or an emergency assisted delivery with forceps. Both scenarios were terrifying to absolutely understand. Like, I mean, giving birth without any complication is already scary. But then to have something like this go on, of course you were terrified. But you chose the option that was the safest for your daughter, knowing full well the consequences that this would have on your body. You state you had a 3C tear that required surgery immediately following the birth, and that they had to do this, of course, while you were awake, right? Ugh. When you contacted us previously, you mentioned that you had done a working, and the deity that you worked with specifically was Hecate. Okay. You say that your working may not have worked the way that you thought it would, but despite everything against you that you felt was against you, you are doing okay. You and baby are doing okay. You're thriving. Very happy to hear that. Okay. Your baby won't have long-term complications, and you are well on your way to making a full recovery. And you feel that that alone is magical, and I would agree. Um, you say that you think Hecate had to show you what you were capable of, that you didn't need her or any other deity, any other spirit to guide you through this very difficult time, that you guided yourself, you delivered your baby, you were strong. You would never have guessed in a million years that little old you could have been so strong. Looking back, this tracks with your relationship with Hecate as a deity. She is constantly showing you what you're made of. Okay. The way that you see it, there were two births that happened that day: the birth of your child and the birth of you as a sovereign, more mature witch. Say thank you for helping you to process and to better understand, and that you love the podcast. Thank you so much. Sorry, I'm tearing up a little bit. I think that, and I wanted to share this story because I think that there's this idea that when we work with deities, many people, at least not everyone, but when many people, when we choose to work with deities, I believe that there's this idea, and it's something that I think carries over from religion, from Christianity a lot. There's this idea that if we choose the right God, we say the right prayers, and we make the right offerings, that that God will always be there to step in and save us. Will always be there to work a miracle in our favor. Will always be there, always be there, always be there. And the reality is that they are always there with us. That does not always mean that they are going to fix whatever that situation may be, because there are a lot of things going on when you look at all of the things that go on in our lives, particularly a lot of the bad things, right? The things that we don't want to have to deal with. There are always a lot of pieces to those situations. And I think that when people have a moment like the one that you went through, where this was so scary and so painful, I think that a lot of people, when they have something like this, they feel a sense of abandonment. They feel rejected by the very God that they have put their love and their faith and all of their work and devotion into, right? And it can be really hurtful, that. And I'm tearing up and I'm crying around this because I'm connecting with what you're saying, and I'm feeling a lot for you in this moment because this was really, really hard for you. And I think I'm also crying for a little bit of a selfish reason because this year what has also been very difficult for me. I lost someone this year, and someone very close and meaningful to me died. And and through that moment, I felt that sense of abandonment. I felt that, and I remember even being angry at one point, and just like it's the funniest thing to think about, right? It's like you think about like like when you're out walking, you step on an anthill without realizing it, right? And I just visualize like you're standing there and you've destroyed this anthill, and there's this tiny little ant. They're just shaking its little fist at you, like angry that you've destroyed its home and its family, right? And I remember in that moment being so angry and doing that, being that tiny ant and shaking my little fist and being angry with Hecate that she would do this to me or that she would allow this to happen to me. And I had a while there after that where I really struggled in my practice with Hecate. I really struggled. And I lacked faith. And that's okay. And the thing is through all of that, that was all my stuff. Through all of that, Hecate she was there the whole time. And she even communicated with me. She's like, what was I supposed to do? Death is very much a human thing. People die. What was I supposed to keep this person alive for you forever? Right. And of course, she's absolutely right. And I know that on a logical level, but when we are feeling things so intensely, I think logic fails us, right? Excuse me. But she was there that whole time, and she, many, many months later, I've had an opportunity now to realize like this wasn't even about her. This wasn't about me and her. This was about a very human thing that happens and something, a process I needed to go through, and that's one of the ways I think that our gods help us most. You connected to this exactly. You had an experience as difficult as that experience was. At the end of all of that, you were able to see what you were capable of and how strong you are and how you were able to make a decision as difficult as it was that really proved to be the best decision for both you and your child. And I think that in those moments where we find ourselves facing challenges and things in life that are just so hard, so hurtful, so painful, so scary, I think in those moments, rather than feeling that we have been abandoned by our spirits and our gods, it's better to, I think, realize that they are still with us in those moments. And they will make sure that we navigate it, that we make it through those moments. But those are our check-ins, I think, again, for us in the sense that we have an opportunity. Our spirits afford us, they hold space for us to be able to reconnect with exactly how strong, how powerful, how intelligent we are, and how well we adapt as humans. We are capable of such amazing things, and we can face challenges and overcome things that, yeah, and we do that work for ourselves with the support of our gods, certainly. But that's work we must do for ourselves. And I think that there's certainly a lesson in there for all of us. And I wanted to share your story because I care about you. And I'm so happy to hear that you and your child are okay. But I think your experience was, again, really important for other people, myself for sure, and other people who join us to hear because I think very often we forget these things. We sell ourselves short. We don't honor and acknowledge the strength and the power that we have. And we, I think, as a result, sometimes place unfair expectation upon our gods when they are always there. But even they, as gods, they can't do everything for us, right? What would be the point of this life? What would be the point of the human experience? What would be the point of any of what we are trying to do and working with gods at all to begin with, right? What would be the point of any of that if we had some other spirit that was there really at the end of the day, just making all the decisions, right? And calling all the shots, right? So thank you so much for sharing this. And I hope that you and your baby continue to do well. And I hope that the rest of you will forgive my blubbing, and hopefully get the wisdom of this person's experience. All right, finally, we had a quick question from someone who I believe is follows us on through our TikTok page. Um, and this is an amazing person. I follow this person on the shop page. We follow this person back, and they share some really cool stuff on spirituality, and particularly contrast between alternative spirituality and Christianity. And I love their perspective on a lot of what they share. They ask, and I'm paraphrasing here certainly. They ask, how can we determine if we have our own spiritual power or if we are just receiving strong support from spiritual beings, from the deities, the other spiritual beings that we connect with? Um, and I guess, this is one of those mystery kind of components of spiritual practice, right? Where in answering your question, we never really can know for sure, right? We never really can know. But I have noticed that it feels different. There is a very different feeling when we walk into a situation, when we do a ritual, when we do a spell. There's a very different sense around how that feeling when it is our power behind something, as opposed to the power that we might maybe be receiving from spiritual allies. Um, I think beyond that, we also can see some physiological results or consequences of situations where it is our power as opposed to another spiritual influence, right? For one thing, if you're doing spell work, ritual work, if you're doing even just psychic work, any kind of spiritual work, really, and you've been at that for a little while and you start to kind of feel like what I would describe as like a little bit of a burnout, like you start to feel almost as if like you feel drained, like you've ever had, I'm sure all of you have had a moment, right? Maybe it wasn't a spiritual thing, but you've done something in your life where, like you put a lot of effort, physical effort, mental effort into something, and then you feel tired, right? You feel drained and tired, right? Like in that moment, particularly in the context of spiritual work, that is a validation that the power has really primarily been yours. Other situations where we see other spirits ultimately in influence or doing what they need to do to control or change something, we're not as inclined to feel that. We don't get that same response because we're not really using our power. We're not really using ourselves in that moment. So that's one clear way to actually determine what's going on. But it's been my experience, or not just my experience, it's been a lot of experiences like shared communication I've had with my teachers, other people I know who do magical and spiritual work. Um, that our power and the power of the spirits that we ultimately choose to connect with, our deities, our ancestors, whoever they may be, right? Whoever those spirits may be for you or anybody else, right? That when we connect with those spirits, one of the purposes of that connection is that we actually then kind of we kind of like we blend, right? We're both still separate beings, right? We're separate energies, but when it comes to the exchange of how that energy works in our practice, that it really kind of becomes a blend of what you're putting in and what is potentially kind of being moved through you or channeled through you by spirit, right? So I think that's more common than not. I think many traditions, many cultures, many different practices are going to kind of see a similar idea there, right? That like the power is coming from both you and spirit, right? Um, yeah, one of the other things that you can see maybe being of influence there, excuse me, I was crying and my nose is all stuffy. One of the other things that I can see being of influence there is the way that you have invited spirit into that situation. I think a lot of us day to day as witches, a lot of us will do our spells and our rituals, and maybe if you tend to be maybe more of a secular kind of a practitioner, right? Where maybe you're doing your spells and your rituals, but you're not necessarily calling spirits or gods in for all of that work, right? that would certainly be, again, kind of a clear indication that the majority of the energy behind that situation is probably yours, or maybe some of the energy that is being contributed by, the herbs, the whatever else it is you've added to your spell, right? Um, Whereas, if you were doing like more formal invocation, or like basically inviting spirits in, then you're going to really, in essence, kind of have created more of a door into that situation for your spiritual allies. So then you're likely to see their power as well, right? But I think that in answering your question, again, I've got to come back to, it's always probably going to be a combination of both. Um, yeah, I think that there's just a lot going on out there that would support that. So hopefully that works for you as an answer. Okay. All right. I think I have navigated through all of our stuff. I've cried on camera. Oof. I don't think I ugly cried. Let me know. Let me know. Right. Send me a message like, Mike, oof, ugly cry. Gross. No. Um, anyway, I want to thank you all for spending some time with me again this week. Hopefully, some of what I talked about and some of the information that came through those listener questions is of value to you. Um, we have some really cool stuff. I don't know how many of you are necessarily in the area, but if you are in northern Utah and you have the ability to join us this Friday evening, that is Friday. That would be, oh my goodness, today's the 12th, so 13th, 15th. If you could join us this Friday the 15th at 8 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. And this is for in-person attendance only. We can't really stream this online, unfortunately. But we are going to be doing our Dark Moon, right? This Dark Moon rite seems necessary for some reason. And I don't really know why. I don't really have another way to qualify that. But I think that there have just been a lot of energies around just all of us in the last few weeks that, like, this dark moon, particularly as we are focusing healing around that, right, just seems necessary. So if you can join us this Friday evening, if you are in the Utah area, you can join us in person for our Dark Moon Rite. Please do. That is free to attend, and it's I think each month we do those. They prove to be very powerful experiences for the people who attend. So that's this Friday, September 15th at 8 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. We have a lot of other really cool things coming up. By the time this episode posts, our classes this week will pretty much be done. But in the coming weeks, we have some really cool things happening. I encourage all of you to go and check out the website, www.cauldron.com. We do have an events calendar at the bottom of the homepage. As always, much as we do here with the podcast, all of the work that we really do through the shop is meant to educate and to empower people in their own path, in whatever direction that path may lead, but to empower you in your own path. So do please seek us out, join us, and contact us. Send us your questions. Let us be a resource for you if we can, right? And even if you decide maybe you don't agree with us, right? At least then you know, right? Like, oh, I didn't like that information. I won't go there again, right? But I think that we give people some really good stuff. Yeah. I will be back next week. I for sure will be back next week. I made the promise last week that Austin would be back on this week, and then things happened today, and he isn't. So I will be back next week. I'm 99% sure Austin will be back as well. And we'll get hopefully back on our regular kind of a recording. But that's going to be it for this episode. So thank you so much. You're all amazing, and thank you for tuning in and for supporting the podcast. Like and share us if you can. That really helps us out. Just because we're trying to reach people, right? We want to teach, we want to help, right? And the more people we can potentially connect with, the more we're able to do that work. So otherwise, I'll let you get on with your life. Thank you so much as always. Bye.